Now, I want to talk to you about a new book on Australian political history that might have at least one salient lesson for current politics, especially the voice referendum. The book by political biographer Anne Henderson is being launched tonight and looks at the great rivalry between Liberal founder and Prime Minister Robert Menzies and his counterpart, the Labor leader Herb Doc Evatt. Their careers through the war and especially in the post-war years were extraordinary, and so were their battles, and none more so than the 1951 referendum about banning the Communist Party. Backed by the government and opposed by the opposition, sounds familiar, doesn't it? Which Menzies and the government narrowly lost. In her book, Henderson includes this quote from Lester Webb, writing in the 1950s about the referendum. Generalising from past referendums, one might say that a government has no chance of carrying a referendum proposal against party opposition unless it had at the previous Commonwealth general election a majority of total votes and a majority of votes in each of 4 states, and unless there is a favourable electoral trend sufficient to counteract the inherent advantage enjoyed by the no case. Sounds pretty convincing, doesn't it? And of course, Labor now doesn't have those preconditions. I put to Anne Henderson that this analysis seems fair and prescient when it comes to the voice referendum.
Yes, I was interested in the 51 referendum because it has parallels with the voice. Even last year I was thinking of it because there was a very strong vote for the Yes campaign with the voice up until early this year. In 1951, up until just 2 months out of the referendum, there was a 70 to 80% yes. So that was a very big margin for a referendum, and that's why I saw a parallel.
Yeah, and it's also very similar because you had the government pushing the yes case, and as you say, the government's yes case was supremely high in the polls leading up to the referendum, and you had the partisan divide. The Labor opposition were opposing the referendum. The no case, everyone says, is much easier to run, and that proved to be the case in 1951.
That's for sure. And the other thing that was operating at the time in 51, Bert Evatt wanted to make himself recognised as the new leader of Labor. Chifley had died only a couple of months before in June, and he was the new leader and he had to establish himself. So he really worked on the campaign. He travelled for 2 weeks before Menzies even began. About 5 weeks out, he'd travelled across the continent enormous numbers of miles, north, south, east and west.
So you would have to say, looking at history, looking at the political challenge and history, the voice referendum, from your observation, would be looking pretty perilous at the moment.
I think so. I remember the 1999 referendum on the Republic, and I was with Malcolm Turnbull on that, and there seemed to be an enormous amount of goodwill at the beginning. There was a huge amount of money for the yes case. When it came in so badly defeated, there was an enormous disappointment. Referendums are tricky things, and when we hear the yes case now saying they can pull back in the last 2 weeks, it's not an election campaign. A referendum is on one thing only, just one question, one issue. You can't hand out goodies in the last minute. You can't change the policy in the last minute. People get to know it over time as it's debated, and in between, a lot of little sort of extra bits and pieces to add doubt come into it, which is what happened with the referendum on the Republic. And so it's very difficult to prevail if there's any doubt. And you go back to the 1960s with the other Indigenous referendum, nobody challenged it. It was a simple matter that would not affect most Australians' lives. This time around, it's much more involved in what happens to ordinary Australians. It's a change in the Constitution, and a change that is going to affect them, they think, and many think. So it's a bit like the Republic. It's very difficult.
Yeah, you have a partisan divide too, so a strong no campaign, and it's easy to sow those seeds of doubt, and that's what history tells us. And tell us more about the book, because these two men are fascinating. Robert Gordon Menzies founds the Liberal Party, becomes the longest-serving Prime Minister in this country. Herb Evatt, of course, a long-time Labor leader, was President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, sat in the High Court. Both of these men were brilliant young lawyers before they even dreamed of political careers, and then had amazing political careers on either side of the aisle. Were we lucky to have them?
Oh, I think so. I mean, they actually stood on two sides of what has become the 20th century big debate. One was a secularist, Labor figure, very well educated, believed the United Nations could take the world towards world peace. He really believed that. He had all that kind of left-leaning understanding of the law, and he saw that, you know, dialogue and debate and every nation having a part in that could bring about world peace. Menzies, on the other hand, couldn't see that at all, and he was right, that politics is not as simple as that. Politics has elements in it that do not play the game. This whole thing is like a Greek tragedy. Two really strong and able Australians, leaders, lawyers. One has his moment at the beginning and crucifies himself in a way through his own paranoia, and the other comes out of the wilderness where he thinks he's a failure and he's almost going to leave politics. He actually wanted to leave politics, forms a new party and falls into government in 49 and triumphs. So it's just a marvellous story. It's an extraordinary story, and no one's ever kind of put it in that style. So I thought I'd have a go.
Yeah, brilliantly done, Anne. Congratulations on the book, and enjoy the launch tonight.
Thanks, Chris.